And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Friday morning. IFR here through the central interior up to about the Brooks Range. Then becomes VFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast, southeast interior, mostly VFR, and some marginal VFR still over south central Alaska. Otherwise becoming pretty good with VFR down to Kodiak Island, and some marginal VFR here for the Alaska Peninsula with a system just to the south. And not too bad for the Aleutians, southern Bering Sea, quite an area of VFR out that way. And for the southeast coast, some VFR along the coast. That translates into IFR over toward the border. And then for the afternoon hours, VFR, northern panhandle there with areas of marginal VFR on down toward Dixon Entrance. Still some IFR here over the north central interior to the southern slopes of the eastern Brooks Range. And along the Alaska Range here, western Alaska Range, and into the northern areas there, some areas here. And then marginal VFR, south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, VFR Kodiak, Bristol Bay VFR, the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, VFR. Most of the Bering Sea as well, looking pretty good there with the northern Bering Sea from about St. Lawrence Island up to the northwest coast. Some marginal VFR with some areas of IFR as well. Then for Saturday morning, western interior here has a area of IFR in it that kind of dissipates as you head south into the Kuskokwim Valley. And Bristol Bay, mostly VFR. Kodiak Island stays VFR, and that extends up into Cook Inlet. IFR over the Talkeetna Mountains, northwest Copper River Basin area. And eastern North Gulf Coast on down the Panhandle, marginal VFR. And then some IFR here over toward the eastern and southeast portions of the southeast coast. And for Saturday afternoon, Arctic coast, North Slope, Brooks Range, VFR, and that extends down into the northern Koyukuk Valley and into the Yukon Flats. Central interior, though, marginal VFR with still some IFR along the Alaska Range up to about Windy Pass, but mostly VFR now, south central Alaska into Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, and out to the west looking really good. Still a lot of marginal VFR, some IFR over toward the border for the Panhandle. And much of the Bering Sea here, again, VFR, eastern Aleutians to about Atka, picking up some marginal VFR for Adak, and then some IFR trying to get into the far western Aleutians. Passes for tomorrow for Anatuvik and Adigan. IFR for both passes, especially on the southern approach, better to the north. Lake Clark and Merrill, occasional IFR at times possible for the day Friday. Rainy, occasionally marginal, and windy, looks marginal, possible IFR in the southern approach. And for Isabel, marginal VFR, but Montesta, go for VFR for that pass. Tanita, marginal VFR, and Portage, also looking a little marginal. Chilcoot and White, VFR. And for the freezing levels here at the surface, right up along the North Gulf Coast or just to the south there, 2,000 feet over the southern Panhandle, and then down south of everywhere here, or south of the eastern Aleutians, 2,000 feet anyway. Surface, though, up into the southeast Bering Sea and the Fox Islands. And moving on to icing, some areas of isolated moderate icing here over the central interior, into south central Alaska down to Kodiak Island, and maybe up over the Yukon Flats area to possibly Arctic Village, as well as the southeast coast. And from there, looking at the jet stream at 33,000 feet, westerly flow 115 to 135 knots, moves into the Gulf of Alaska, actually blowing all the way across, turning more northwesterly at about 120 knots across the Panhandle into western Canada. And at 9,000 feet, strongest winds a little farther to the south, 65 knots there, cutting across just south of Kodiak Island. Southwest 35 knots here into the Yukon Delta coast. Light over the interior, and mostly west-northwest at about 40 knots for the southeast coast. And maybe 55 knots there, Adak and Atka. Otherwise, at 3,000 feet, Bering Sea, westerlies, 40 to 45 knots, right into Bristol Bay. And then they die off as they make landfall here, and could see a little breezy conditions still with this low, but nothing too significant. Up to the north, though, the eastern and central Arctic coast, easterlies at 30 to 45 knots. pretty smooth, or I'm sorry, lighter winds for the panhandle, much of the interior under some weak high pressure. And with these stronger winds here for the Arctic coast, we've got some moderate turbulence in the forecast there from, say, Wainwright all the way down to Point Hope and Cape Lisburne. Otherwise, light to isolated moderate. So a big improvement here over the today for the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island area, as well as the Aleutians, and pretty smooth over the interior down into the Gulf of Alaska and the Panhandle.